Good morning. First of all, I want to thank Andrew. As Andrew said, we've known each other about 10 to 12 years through the ELC. I don't know Andrew that well, but I know him well enough to know his heart. And I can tell you he's committed to things like the Power of Breakfast to help entrepreneurs continue to grow and prosper. And I know he'll continue to do everything he can to accomplish that goal. By way of background, as Andrew said, I love business. This is something I really enjoy since I was a kid, believe it or not. It's something I've always known I want to do. And my wife would be the first to tell you that you only can do one thing, right? And that's business. But I think I do that well, right? By way of background, I'm from Ohio. I'm a big Buckeye fan. I don't know if there are any football fans, but there's probably some Michigan people in the room, but I'm a big Ohio State fan. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, attended University of Cincinnati with a degree in operations management. Operations management is basically a combination of engineering and understanding the factory environment, if you will. So I went to work for General Motors after that for a couple of years. Ran our third shift as a 22-year-old managing 60-year-old guys who knew every trick in the world as part of the union and used every trick on me. But I grew up quickly as a result of that. I came here to New York a couple of years after that to attend Columbia Business School. At Columbia, I majored in finance and marketing. Met my wife there, which is probably the greatest benefit I received there. But beyond that, received a degree in finance and marketing. Went back to Ohio to work at Procter & Gamble in our finance organization as cash manager and several other finance positions. When I left there, I was the head of basically the equivalent of CFO for our respiratory business, which includes things like NyQuil, Formula 44, Metamucil, those kind of products. My wife got a job in Chicago, so I promised her if she got a job in Chicago, I'd go to Chicago. And she had 5 offers in a week. So with that commitment, I moved there without a job. And quickly, got hired by Sarah Lee as the business development, in charge of business development for the Pacific Rim. In that role, it wasn't the role that I really thought it was supposed to be. It became more of an accounting role than anything, which I understand accounting, but I'm not an accountant. Finance and accounting are 2 different things. So Donnelly hired me as their assistant treasurer. And we did things such as evaluate whether we had a room into Russia or Poland or places like that. And eventually the CEO promoted me to be VP of Finance for one of our business units. I got promoted to Senior VP of Finance for our magazine and catalog business. And then the CEO asked me to run strategy for the company. At the time, it was about a $6 billion company. CEO liked what I did. We had a troubled business here in New York, which was losing about $20 million a year. So they promoted me to president of our financial services group, which was about $1 billion unit, and that's how we got back to New York. So with that in mind, I give you that background because of the experience in operations, finance, marketing, and strategy, and working with some of the best consultants in the world, including the Booz Allens, the McKinsey, who would help some of our companies. I learned a lot of things that I created a model for myself so that I launched my own consulting business to help, small to medium-sized businesses grow. So I'm going to go over some of that today with you, but I want to give you that background in order to try to help you see some of the things I've done so that hopefully there'll be some credibility in some of the things I'm going to talk to you about today. So the topic of today is building an effective strategy, but I want to expand that, and I want you to remember this one single thought as we talk through today. And that is this: the strategy is necessary, but it's not sufficient. Okay? You have to go beyond just taking that strategy and putting it in a nice binder and then putting it on the shelf. Nothing gets done by the strategy. You have to go beyond that and you have to execute. And execution is the key to strategy. So strategy alone is not sufficient. Necessary, but not sufficient. All right? So if we're going to spend time today going through the strategy process, I want your commitment to be, once you develop your strategy, that you're going to keep that in front of you, front and center, so that you can execute on it every day, all right? So today I hope to inspire you to take the necessary steps to create a comprehensive strategy that's designed to win in the marketplace. A comprehensive strategy requires research, engagement, critical thinking, perseverance, passion, and many other meaningful attributes. But strategy alone is not enough to reach your destination that you desire. Unless there's a focus on strategy and execution, you can forget about reaching your business aspiration. Your strategy will die a quick death and end up buried in a binder inside your desk, like the strategies of so many other leaders who had lofty goals, but who never saw their dreams fulfilled. As a leader, you must do the whole job. The first order of business includes establishing clear objectives, followed by strategic platforms designed to support 3 strategic priorities. And when I look at business, I try to capture our job as business leaders into 3 key priorities. Priority number 1, what is my strategy to optimize my business? Number 2, what is my strategy to grow my business? And number 3, what is my strategy to be distinctive versus my competitors? Optimization, growth, and distinction. If you can focus on those 3 things and have specific strategies designed to be more efficient through optimization, to accelerate your growth, and to separate yourselves from the competition by understanding where you're going to play and where you're going to create a competitive advantage, I think you can create a winning strategy. Once the strategic platforms have been established, you must be relentless in executing the strategy in a way that involves the entire organization. Whether you have 1 person or 5,000. In fact, my personal mindset and belief is that every employee deserves to know how they can most meaningfully contribute to the company's success. Every employee deserves to know how they can most meaningfully contribute to the company's success. I encourage you to share your plan with every employee and show them how they can help to deliver the plan in concrete and measurable ways. Now, to help you understand how to create a strategy and get everyone involved, I'll share my real life story at R. Donnelley. And before I'm finished, I'll provide you with 6 principles to consider as you think about strategy and relentless execution in your own organization. At the end, we'll have a Q&A period. Here's the story of how we successfully use strategy and relentless execution to involve all our employees in an effort to significantly improve our performance. In early 2002, I was named president of R. Donnelley Financial, a $1 billion global unit of the R. Donnelley Company. R. Donnelley is the world's largest printing company. We print magazines, catalog, the phone book, books, all the popular Harry Potter, the Bible. We print everything, right? The largest printer in the world. Now, because of my background in operations, finance, and creating strategy in prior assignments, the CEO of R. Donnelley sent me to New York to lead the turnaround of R. Donnelley Financial. The business had 5,000 employees across 40 locations around the world, but it was losing $20 million per year. Globally, it was in second place behind Bound and Company. At the time, I was assigned to take over the business. For every $1 that Bound had, we had 63 cents. So that tells you the difference in their size versus us. So if we were $1 billion, they were like 1.6 billion or so, right? So they were number 1 globally. In essence, Bound had approximately 6% of our revenue, 60% more of our revenue. Now, the first thing we did, and the first thing you should ever do before you even think about strategy, is to fully analyze your business. And when it comes to analyzing your business, what you're looking for are winning opportunities versus your key competitors. We looked at market data. We looked at internal performance data, such as our gross margins, our levels of service, our growth rates, our customer service, our employee satisfaction, how we were growing in the market, our products and services versus our competitors. It's a thorough analysis. And that's the first thing you should do before you even consider thinking about doing the strategy, is a thorough analysis of the market that you're playing in. And based on this information, we gathered our leadership team, we summarized our findings for a leadership summit that was going to be designed to create what we call a common understanding. If you're going to lead a team to a new direction, after you've analyzed the business, you must first get all of your leadership team to have a common understanding of where the business stands, where the opportunities are, so that everybody can be on the same page and be on a common plane. I have a firm belief that when there's a lot of disagreement, it's because you don't have a common understanding. And you have to go through an exercise where you're sharing your information and they're sharing theirs, so that you can leave that meeting with everybody grounded with the same facts and the same information, all right? So analysis, move that to a common understanding so everybody understands all the key issues and opportunities facing the business. So prior to the meeting, I personally analyzed both the internal and external data. And based on my review, I created one clear objective supported by 4 programs that would guide our team over the 5-year period. I set a 5-year objective to improve profits by $100 million. So we were losing 20, and I set a plan that I said within 5 years, we're going to improve this business by $100 million. So we'd go from losing 20 to making 80 million in 5 years. Now imagine the grunts and the stares that I got from my leadership team. This was a team familiar and used to losing money. And I come in and I said, we're going to increase by $100 million over 5 years. My mindset was, what about Bob? Bob was my imaginary investor. Everybody else was making money, but Bob. So that was my mantra in the organization. I would always say, but what about Bob? Are we going to continue to let Bob lose $20 million a year while the salespeople are making hundreds of thousands of dollars, while I'm getting paid a significant amount of money, and while everybody else in the organization was making a lot of money? So the mantra was, let's create $100 million improvement. Now, remember the team had experienced significant losses in 2 years prior to my arrival. However, after several days of sharing my analysis and getting the team's input, the team began to believe, somewhat reluctantly, that reaching $100 million in profit improvement was possible. Now, I used some old school methodologies, such as you can't go home until we all get on the same page and we realize we can get to 100 million, or you don't serve lunch until everybody gets on the same page, right? And quickly people start believing, right? Now, I'm being a little facetious here, but seriously, there were times where we had to, like one of our goals was to improve profit and reduce costs by 55 million. I'm a finance guy, so I can analyze the financials, and I could see 55 million, but my team couldn't see it. But until they saw it, one night I remember we stayed there until about 8 o'clock in the evening, and they could only see about 30 million. We canceled all the meetings the next day, and we said, we'll come back here at 7 in the morning, and we'll spend all day tomorrow until everybody can see 55 million. This is the concept of go slow before you go fast. You make sure everybody understands the plan and how you can get there before you run off and execute. So everybody eventually saw the 100 million. After the team got over the initial shock, we agreed to 4 strategic platforms that would guide us over the 5-year period to help us reach the $100 million profit objective. The platforms were as follows, and they sort of fit in those 3 things I told you earlier. Platform number 1 was to be the number 1 in global market share within 5 years. I didn't want to be number 2. I wanted us to be number 1 in 5 years. Platform number 2 was to optimize our operations and reduce our costs by by $55 million in 5 years. Platform number 3 was to be, when we analyzed our data, we saw that there's a huge opportunity to be the best in service. All of our competitors were satisfied at disappointing 15% of their clients. On-time delivery, the best in class was 85% on-time delivery. And people were satisfied with that. But my question was, what about those 15% that out of every 100 interactions, you had 15 people who you disappointed, right? And we saw that opportunity to improve service. So we said platform number 3 was to be the best in service in 5 years. And then platform number 4 was we were going to create new products and services that would create another $50 million in revenue that we would sell to our current clients. Now the platforms were designed, and your platform should be designed, to guide us and establish guardrails for deployment of resources, key decisions, and areas of focus. In essence, all major initiatives had to support one of the 4 platforms, or they were not put on the agenda for discussion or funding. This approach enabled the team to be very focused on the most important initiatives and ensured that on a daily basis we were focused on our strategic ideas. Now, although we had a strategy that we agreed to pursue as one team with one voice, it was too early to celebrate. We had only designed the house. So strategy is like going to build a new house and you're going to the architect and you've designed the house you want to build. That's really all strategy is. The house has not been built. All you've done is design the house. That's where a lot of people make a lot of mistakes. They celebrate after the design is done, but nothing has happened. So we knew that the real work started when it was time to build the house. So how do we build the house? The first thing we did was we focused on putting the necessary structure in place to support the strategy. We hired a VP of marketing to drive the market share in new products and services platforms. We hired a VP of service to drive our service platform. And we hired a VP of outsourcing, a critical position to support our cost reduction platform. We set specific objectives for each of the leaders and made it clear that the job was to drive initiatives that would meet the specific platform targets in support of the overall $100 million objective. We then clarified the roles and responsibilities of everyone on the senior leadership team. We made their accountabilities clear and created strategic metrics and scorecards for each key department. The actions were necessary to drive the accountability culture we needed to reach our objective. Now, can you imagine losing $20 million a year? Obviously, there's an accountability problem, right? So we had to fix that as part of our building the house. We had to build the right culture of accountability as part of that. The next thing we focused on was communicating the strategy to all 5,000 employees around the world. Our primary communications included a road show where we visited every region within a 3-month period to personally deliver our strategic plan and to give everyone a chance to hear it directly from me and get their questions answered. So these were one-on-one dialogues across the United States, in London, in Paris, in Hong Kong, in Japan, and other places around the world, where we would talk about our strategy, but we would give every employee a chance to ask a question in case they wanted to get more insight into what we were doing. But we had to engage everybody. The best outcome is only if you can get every single person rowing in the same direction. You can't leave anybody uncovered. So it's a lot of hard work up front so you can get the results in the future. After the road show, we held monthly webcasts with all 5,000 employees. So every month we'd have a webcast where we would put our report card up there on how the executive team was doing. We would highlight key initiatives that were consistent with the strategy, key ideas that people came up with. By the way, as a result of intentionally engaging our employees monthly, many of them did come up with ideas to support one of our 4 platforms, and the ideas were eventually rolled out globally. Now, while there are many other change management practices we put in place to align the organization to our strategy, I'll end here by discussing one of my favorites. We launched what was in effect the Oscars for our organization. The Oscars consisted of an annual leadership dinner for our top 100 or so leaders. During the dinner, 4 individuals from our leadership team received the Oscar for best achievements in one of the 4 strategic platforms. If you're going to say that these are the four most important things you can do, you need to align your award systems to those, all right? So the Oscars is one of our award systems. It gave people the opportunity to get public recognition from their peers, which, by the way, is more important to most people than money, to be recognized in front of your peers. This was a coveted award, a nice little plaque that people, crystal-like plaque that people put on their desk, and people would give acceptance speeches and everything as part of this. It was really like the Oscars, and it was something that people look forward to every single year, and they were like really coveted. Again, it was just one more thing to keep people focused on what was important. Now, as I stated earlier, the aforementioned examples represent just a fraction of the hard and intentional work required to create a strategy and align everyone to it. But for the sake of time, I've only highlighted a few important actions as examples of what's required. So, I'm sure you all want to know what were the results, right? Okay. So, we delivered $55 million in savings in 3 years, 2 years in advance of our goal. We improved our market share from 63 cents per dollar of our number one competitors to 93 cents per dollar. So we significantly closed the gap. And we took our market share between the two of us from a 38% share to a 48% share in 3 years. We improved our on-time delivery from 85% on time to a little over 94% in that 3-year period. And over the same 3-year period, we improved profits from a loss of $20 million to a gain of $80 million. We met our $100 million improvement in line with our strategic objective. To everyone's surprise, we accomplished this as well 2 years earlier than planned. I want to share one more important point. The strategy and execution have to be larger than you as the leader. It couldn't be about me. I alone could not create $100 million. It took all 5,000 employees. But when you do strategy and you do execution, you're putting processes and systems in place that would last beyond you, okay? You don't want to be that superstar CEO or superstar entrepreneur where everything's dependent on you. You have to set up systems, processes, approaches so that you get hit by a bus, your family will still be in good condition because you've set up an organization that will continue to thrive. So if you've engaged every employee and helped them believe in possibilities, the strategy will have life way after you're gone. I left R.R. Donnelley after 3 years in that role in at the end of 2005. So let's see what happened after I left. 1 year after I left, I received a call from my replacement informing me that R.R. Donnelley Financial has surpassed Bound as the #1 global market share leader in the financial services group. Hence, another strategic platform objective was met within the 5-year period. 2 years later, after I left, I received another call informing me that R.R. Donnelley purchased Bound. All right? By the way, at the time, I think Bound was one of the oldest companies on the New York Stock Exchange when we bought them. I was gone. I'm still saying we, but I was gone at the time. We totally disrupted the industry because we believed in our strategy, and more importantly, we believed in our people. We believed in their insight, their passion, and their willingness to help us win. And it's through this experience that I'm a firm believer that strategy is necessary, but it's not sufficient. Strategic execution and employee engagement is just as important as the strategy itself. I mean, think about it. How can you win at anything if the entire team doesn't know how they should participate in reaching the organization's goal? As promised, I'll close by highlighting 6 keys to creating and executing strategy in your organization. Key number 1, your mission, vision, and aspiration must be clear and simple. I'm not going to go over what our mission and visions were, but the aspiration was the $100 million. It was one simple goal, $100 million of profit improvement in 5 years. Make it simple. Number 2, develop the strategic platforms or pillars that will guide you. The pillars must focus on optimizing operations, distinguishing your organization from the competition, and strategies for growth. Let me just take a few minutes just to explain a little bit more about those 3 pillars. Optimization is simply being more efficient at what you do. One of the key things I like to look at is return on equity. If you look at return on equity, you can break that down between profit margins, asset turns, and capital leverage. Today, maybe we can do another session on this later, Andrew, to get into some of the financial terms and really break that down for you. We don't have time for that today. But looking for opportunities to be efficient as possible across all 3 of those things in order to drive your return on equity. So margin improvements as an example. You take cost out, that improves your margin. You find ways to be able to raise your price where you create more value, that improves your margin. You look at the mix of the businesses that you're producing and see which one has the higher margin business and do more of that versus a lower margin. Those are things that you look at in order to optimize your business. Being distinctive versus your competition. You want to write this down. There are 5 fundamental things that research shows that people will primarily use to distinguish themselves versus the competition, or 5 primary things that people usually compete on. Either they're going to be the most innovative, they're going to have the lowest price, they're going to have the best quality, they're going to have the best service, or they're going to compete on speed. Those are the 5 fundamental things that most companies compete on. The key is to be as good or in relative parity with competitors across all 5 of those things. And pick one, only one, to decide that you're going to be distinctive in. So we were at parity in quality, we were at parity in price, and price doesn't mean you have to have the exact price. Parity is within a range of price relative to what you offer. So we were at parity in quality, price, speed, and innovation. And we chose service to separate ourselves versus the competition. That's what drove us to number 1. You do the same thing for your business. Understand where you are versus your competitors on all 5 of those. Fix it if you're not at parity, but choose one to way exceed your customers or your competition. The third thing under developing these platforms, this is not the third major point, this is point 2C. Let's go with that. 2A was optimization, 2B was distinction versus competition, 2C is growth. There's really only a few ways to grow. Taking your same product and looking for new markets and new customers, or taking your same customers and offering them new products and new services, or a combination of the 2. The key is not to try to do it all with limited resources. Pick a path with the resources you have and stay on that path. As you create more resources, you can go down the other path. The worst thing you want to do is trying to straddle between multiple strategies because you don't have the resources to do it all. Major point number 3. We're done with point number 2. Put the structure in place to support the strategy. Structure includes roles, processes, tools, your hierarchy. Remember, I hired the VP of marketing, the VP of service, the VP of outsourcing. Who are the right people that you need in order to support your strategy? Number 4, be relentless about driving the culture needed to ignite and support the strategy. Most of you probably heard the saying, the culture eats strategy for lunch. You can have the right strategy, but if the culture is wrong, it will eat your strategy alive. You cannot allow your culture to be disruptive, even if you have to make an example of somebody. I'm a person with a good heart, I believe. I'm vice chairman of my church, 7,000 member church, so I love people. But if you get in the way of the strategy, you've decided to leave on your own, right? It was your choice, right? So don't let culture disrupt your strategy. Make sure the majority of your resources enable programs or initiatives to support the strategic platform. So put your money behind the initiatives that support the platforms. And number 6, that was number 5. Okay, let me go back. 3 was the structure. 4 was be relentless about culture. 5 was initiatives or platforms supporting those initiatives that support your strategic platform. Number 6 is measure everything and everyone. I'm going to speed up because I know we're limited on time. By the way, the process works for very large and very small companies. Here are 2 quick examples of how we've advised clients in very different industries and the results they've gained by following this process. In 2008, we were hired by a Texas home builder that had about 10 employees and $8 million in revenue. We were hired at the peak of the housing market crash. We advised the home builder on winning strategies despite the market conditions. And as a result, the home builder today has over $200 million in revenues, approximately 200 employees, and has become the #1 home builder in the region it serves. We continue to advise this client, and our next frontier is to help the home builder reach the $1 billion mark. So the worst housing industry what we faced in 2008, this company has now grown from 8 million to 200 million, and by the way, has created 6 other companies from that home building company. Number 2, we were hired by a Missouri-based ingredients company in 2011. Prior to our help, the company had experienced profit growth of about 3% annually. We helped lead the company through a strategic plan and alignment process to change the profit trajectory from a growth of 3% a year to 12% annually since 2011. Again, this has created significant value for the company and its family shareholders. Now, I hope these 3 examples we've shared, me running R. Donnelly, the home building company, and the Missouri-based ingredients company, with you today will provide the inspiration and help you believe in the power of strategy, execution, and employee engagement. And most of all, remember, strategy is necessary, but it's not sufficient. With that, I'll open it up. Andrew, if we still have time for a quick Q&A. Stan.
Can you talk a little bit more about creating a culture and how much of it is hiring the right people with the right attitudes from the start, but how you work with the people who may not have the right attitude?
Yeah, a couple examples. Again, like I said, I love people. So it's always my objective to, one of my faults is I help too many people. I know it didn't sound like it when I was talking, but that is one of my faults, that my wife will tell me that it's hard for me to say no when someone needs help. But when you're trying to make a change, and I was responsible for 5,000 people, and Bob, the shareholder, right? So the decisions I made had implications to those people. So you can't have that one bad apple that destroys it for them all. So I can be tough when I have to be. So I'll just give you one quick example. I thought I had my entire senior team on board. And one of the things we were going to do is we were going to outsource to India our composition business. The composition business is where you do in the back rooms in the most expensive cities across the world. You got people in the back room typing documents so that we can file with the SEC and print, prospectuses and other documents that were very secure. One of our strategies was to outsource that to India, which would cut our costs significantly while actually improving our service. Because we could get twice the amount of people in India and turn the documents around quickly, because it was all about service and low cost, right? And get it back faster than we could with the army of people in that same location in the back room. Technology allowed us to do that. Here's the problem. The old Donnelly saw the people in the back room as sacred cows. They thought that's why we were winning, of the people in the back room. The salespeople thought that's why we were winning. Our sales managers thought that's why we were winning. So I had a 5,000 employee webcast one day and said, we're going to outsource to India, open it up to all 5,000 employees to ask any questions they wanted. No one asked any questions. The next day, my secretary runs to my office and said, there's a revolt. The salespeople are going crazy. I said, all right, and it was all the salespeople from around the world. I said, all right, get them on a conference call and let's see what their issue is. I assumed my VPs and my senior VPs of sales were going to step in and handle their people. They were on the same side of the table as the salespeople. So at that point in time, I had to pull out the bat, the baseball bat, right? Because even godly men have tools that we can use, right? Righteous indignation is kind of what rose up in me. Exactly. And I chewed out my sales VPs in front of all of their VPs. Because I have a saying, public insult deserves a public, action. If you would come behind closed doors and had that conversation and say we're having a revolt, but the first time I hear about this, you bring your whole sales team. So it was me against everybody. And I just laid down the law and said, we're going to do it. It's in motion and it's not going to stop. And this is a critical part of our strategy, which I assumed you two sales VPs were on board with, only to find out you weren't. And everybody today better get on board. And made it that simple. We executed it. A year later, the salespeople wanted more of it. That's what I mean by culture. You have to know where you're going, and you have to take a stand on what's important. We spent all this time developing a strategy, and it's in the execution that it falls apart. And you as the leader can't allow that. There's some things you have to stand firm on. Culture is about having these Oscars, because that sends the message, these are the important things. Culture is about putting a scorecard out there so that everybody understands. Every time we meet, I want to see where you are. The accountability culture, performance culture. Culture is about saying 20 million loss is not the culture we're going to live in. Constantly improving our performance is the culture we're going to live in. So you come in and you go from losing 20 to I'm going to create 100 million in 5 years. That was a culture shift. So you see the culture continue because they became number one eventually. And then they eventually bought the company that was number one. So that's what I mean by culture. John?
Out of the 5,000 people you rolled out to and visited and whatnot, how many people did you get rid of?
We had that composition piece I was talking about. I think that represented about 250 people. So we got rid of all internal composition and outsourced it. That was no fault of theirs, right?
But how about the other people that were not on board?
Oh, I eventually let one of my senior guys go, but that was for a number of other reasons. Part of it was he wasn't on board. You know, he was constantly saying stuff like, I don't think we're going to ever get there, right? And he was a good man. He had a good heart. He was a good people person. But you can't lead if you don't believe, right? Right. Yeah. He wasn't necessarily negative. He was comfortable in an environment where everybody made money but Bob. I wouldn't say he didn't care. It was just he couldn't see it. Because I don't want to say anything negative about him. He really was a good man. He couldn't believe himself. And if you don't, there's another saying. You might want to write this one down too. Our insight drives our beliefs. Okay? This is biblical. If you get an insight from the Bible and believe it, or if going through the data of your business, you get an insight and you believe you can get better. Our insights drive our beliefs. It's our beliefs that drive our behaviors, right? And it's our behaviors that drive our results. So if I couldn't get him behind the belief, he's never going to change his behaviors. And if he doesn't change his behaviors, we're not going to get the results. So I didn't get rid of him because he was a bad man. I got rid of him because he couldn't believe, right? And you can't be in charge of a significant part of the organization and you not believe, because that means, there's another saying called the shadow of the leader. People will fall in the shadow of the leader, and they will go where that shadow leads them, right? So if he couldn't believe, so great guy, he just couldn't believe. Andrew, I don't know how much more time we got, but, okay.
In businesses that I've run before, I think I had a problem in the strategy and finding metrics, finding ways to measure if you're having success or not. What do you use to find those metrics, those things to measure whether you have success or not?
Well, it depends on your strategy, right? So in our platform, we actually measured our market share. When I said, we didn't have market share measurements in place when I got there, but I spent a lot of time at Procter & Gamble, and market share is, it's huge there. So I knew we needed to have market share. So you want to align your metrics to your strategy. So those 4 platforms I talked about, one being we wanted to be number 1 globally. Well, we had to get data that showed where we were versus our competition. So we can get their annual reports and see where they were versus us. There are also other tools that we had access to with the SEC, so we can see how many filings they did with the SEC versus how many filings we did, as an example. So that's an example of there. As far as costs, we wanted to drive $55 million of costs out of the business. You can see that easily on your P&L. You can see how your costs are changing relative to your sales. So let's say that your cost as a percentage of sales is 50%. And let's say 50% represents $500 million. Well, if I want to reduce it by 55 million, I need to take my cost from representing 50% down to about 45% of sales. So that can be a way you measure your costs. But it depends on your strategy, then you align your metrics to it. Anything else? Any other questions? All right, thank you.